Hi there, Dr. Carmen McGuinness here with you. I was just about to get started with our video and I found these beautiful lemons on my lemon tree, so had to pick them first. So today we're going to talk about cognition versus emotion. Stay with me. The tree is in blossom too. What a treat. So yeah, tonight I'll probably cook something with fresh lemon in it. Maybe some artichoke hearts. I have some of them. And a little light pasta. We'll see. So anyway, today we're going to talk about cognition versus emotions. So we can think of cognition as thoughts and emotions as feelings. We're going to dive deep into that today and see how the two interplay with one another. Just a reminder that this is the fourth in a four-part series titled The Dichotomous Self. So this will be the last of that series, and this Wednesday I'll be doing a midweek sneak peek as to what's coming up next. So in the previous three segments we discussed self-love versus self-loathing, dichotomy, self-forgiveness versus self-blame, another dichotomy, and last week we discussed self-acceptance versus self-criticism, yet another dichotomy. Today it is cognition, thoughts, versus what we feel. And hopefully this will help summarize what we've talked about so far. Of course, we understand that the word cognition refers to our thoughts, while emotion refers to our feelings. Instead, however, of discussing these as thoughts and feelings as two separate constructs, I hope today to shed light on how they are part of one system, the self, and how they play back and forth to one another, drive one another. And drive is actually a really good analogy to use here, one to start with. Imagine that I'm a taxi driver. On the side of my taxi is the word thoughts in big bold letters. And where I go, where I drive you, where thoughts go, determines the emotion that follows. If I drive you to Disney World, you might feel excited. If I drive you to a raging forest fire, you might feel fear. If I drive you to a nice restaurant where that new guy or girl that you've been seeing is waiting, you might feel a little nervous because it's new, but also kind of happy. The same is true of actual thoughts, driving emotions. If our thoughts are dark and frightening, not enough money, too much work, I might get fired, I might get sick, my kids are in jeopardy, we end up in fear and anxiety. If our thoughts are of happy possibilities and fruitful plans, we end up in hope and joy. So we see how thoughts drive the emotions, but emotions also drive thoughts. When we experience apprehension of any sort, it's a biological imperative to find the source of it so that we can keep ourselves safe. We scan the mind and might light upon, for example, the way our boss looked at us earlier today when we got back from lunch 5 minutes late, or the way our child spoke to us on Tuesday evening when we told him to go finish his homework before texting with his friends. And now, with something identified, we focus our thoughts, our cognition on it, hyperfocus. And of course, emotions grow bigger and deeper and more in our face, shouting things like, "You're sure to be fired soon," or "Your kid is almost certainly on drugs." Now, when emotion and cognition are working well, playing nicely together, we can think of emotion as emerging parts of ourselves, things percolating up from the subconscious things that the subconscious has noticed in our real world, and cognition as that which reflects upon them, interprets and makes sense of them. But then when we consider that these emotions form in our subconscious from our own reality, what we see and hear and feel around us, we realize that this is a cyclical process. And herein lies the dichotomy, that these two parts spin round and round, creating and weaving the whole of our reality. And in this way, we begin to see how our moment-to-moment life arises, how we form our reality. And it's in this realization that the real power begins to emerge, that we begin to understand that it's within our power to select and nurture certain emotions and to release others. Now, it's very important to pay attention to the word release, which I just used, because to ignore or to avoid is a very different process indeed, and one that results in a very different outcome. An old friend once told me that he can select his thoughts and will never worry or fear because of this great skill. He went on to liken it to a flowering plant that you might put in a dark closet and allow to die. Well, I have many worries myself and fears in my own life. I'm a busy girl. I have a lot going on, so I think most of us do, in fact. So I'm thinking that my closet, and maybe yours too, would be full of dead plants, dirt, and rotting pottery in no time if we just decided to follow my friend's advice and put our worries in a dark closet, pretend that they're not there, and hope that they die. Another friend once told me, "Don't worry, just talk reason to yourself." This is when I was a very young woman. Well, I don't know about you, but in my own life there have been many moments when I did not see the reason or the logic, the way out of a bad situation. Yet when we look back on those most difficult moments, we see that we did indeed survive them, and that worry did very little, if anything, to assist in our survival. And there was just no logic to be had. Instead of a closet full of dead plants or a logical pep talk when there might not be any logic, I suggest instead that we simply free our thoughts. And this is a tremendously useful function of the mind once you learn it. This is the mind taking control and saying, you don't know all the details right now. You don't have the rest of the equation. You can complete the equation when you do. For now, let's just free those thoughts until we know more. I do this with visualization. I turn worries and fears into butterflies or birds. My followers on YouTube know how much I enjoy nature, so for me that works. And I just sort of see them flying away. And I teach clients to do the same. Some clients have used a leaf floating by in a stream, or perhaps wind in a wheat field or a cornfield to free their worries. One client who's a sailor envisioned himself standing on the bow of his sailboat and watching the water flow by, the worries flow by. The trick here is motion, rather than sitting with your worries or trying to ignore them. Simply release them and send them on their way. And as we visualize these images rather than the scenarios that our worries and fears might have spun, we see we are breathing again and more deeply, which begins to slow the heart rate. Our blood oxygen level returns to normal as well. And if we do this within 4 to 6 minutes of the worry starting, we've stopped the flow of cortisol that would have occurred when we ran short of adrenaline, because that's the way the body works. You see, adrenaline only lasts for a few minutes and takes a long time to restock. So in an emergency, perceived or real, the body sends out cortisol, which has a half-life of a couple of hours, 66 to 102 minutes. That means you could stay upset for maybe 3 hours. A half-life is when it peaks and then starts to subside. So we're looking at somewhere around 3 hours of being upset. That's a very long time in the middle of a night that's only 7 or 8 hours at best. So instead of sleepless nights, we can see the benefit of intervening where we can, which is in the cognition part of that back and forth between emotions and cognition, in our thoughts. Not through control, which only leads to a closet filled with dead plants, zombie fears and worries, but through release. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this is easy, and it's harder for some than others. There are individual differences in how we react to emotions. A broad range of research in the field of personality indicates that 30 to 60% of emotionality is inherited from our parents and grandparents, while 40 to 70% is extrapolated from our individual personality traits. And to be clear, personality traits are enduring life traits. These are associated with, those that are associated with emotionality are neuroticism, the propensity to worry, fear, and have anxiety. Emotional sensitivity, which is how much we feel our emotions. And empathy, how sensitive we are to the emotions of others. Traits should be distinguished from states or moods which are transient. Easy or not, we can ride with our emotions by peppering them with the right sort of thoughts. In other words, we can change our responses. If you find you need help doing this sort of thing, help beyond your own research on the internet and work with meditation perhaps and contemplation, you might consider working with a therapist qualified in this sort of work. This might be a yoga or a meditation instructor, a monk. I know I personally work with a monk. I go and help the monks pick weeds in their gardens. We move, we walk, that motion I spoke about while we talk, and meditate in motion. Or perhaps a mindfulness coach or a psychologist who has received some kind of specialized training in mindfulness practices. Needless to say, I'd be happy to work with you. I work out of my Altamont Springs office and also online via a HIPAA-secure video platform. And good news, I have a special spring and summer rate for brief therapy, only $400 for 5 sessions. And I'll put a link to my email address in the description box below this video. Just send me an email if you want to talk about this or if you need help being pointed in some other direction. We'll arrange something. We'll talk. As mentioned at the start, this is the last in a 4-part series, so please join me on Wednesday for your midweek sneak peek as to what we'll be talking about next Sunday. And also please be aware that I've been doing a new kind of format occasionally on Fridays. I hope to eventually be able to put something up every Friday, but for now it'll be now and then. And these are, well, I'll put a link right here. You can go peek at it. It's a different format. My regular Sunday format, such as what we're doing here today, will continue uninterrupted throughout that new format being introduced. I just hope to get more important content on the site so that you can, on the channel, so that you can get more information. So I will see you Wednesday for my midweek sneak peek. Until then, have a wonderful week. See you soon.